ready. Just poke around first, use the arrows.
I do think the old photos are supposed to stay on the desk until the new ones come in.
Right.
Classic Irving Bailiff. What's good, Innies? Nautilus here, and I've got another behind-the-scenes Severance video to help hold you down until season 2. So, in the last Severance video, I focused on Tramell Tillman, the actor who plays Milchick in the show. But this time we're going to talk about a few other cast members, namely John Turturro. But we'll throw in a little Christopher Walken and some Zach Cherry to round things out. Now, we've all worked with an Irving Bailiff at some point in our lives, and if you haven't, then maybe it's you that's the Irving Bailiff at your place of work. He's a character that, at first, comes off as a bit whiny, maybe a bit too by the rules, a nitpicker, often called the office narc. You know the type. But by the end of the first season, many fans went from seeing him as an amusing side character to a full-blown protagonist, willing to put it all on the line. So in this video, we're putting Irving Bailiff and the man behind the character, John Turturro, fully into focus. Let's see what we can find. Now, as per usual, if you've been here before, then you already know the deal. Spoilers galore. So be sure you're all in before you go any further. Many thanks to the patrons of the channel. These fine specimens fuel the fire, and I am forever grateful. You can check for the link to the Patreon and the link to the free Discord channel here. It's a cool place where you can chop it up with fans of the show. Now that we've got that squared away, strap in, because it's time to dive. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, John Turturro is a renowned talent in the movie business, with an acting resume that goes way back. Over the past 4 decades, he's worked with the likes of the Coen brothers, Spike Lee, and even Michael Bay. Side note, as is the habit on this channel, if you're looking for a few Turturro recommendations from the Nautilus, check out Do the Right Thing, Barton Fink, and The Big Lebowski. I don't think you can go wrong with any of them. If you do, let me know what you think. Anyway, basically, this man has been acting longer than a lot of us have even been alive. Turturro is known for being an actor who enjoys taking on difficult, varied, and polarizing roles. And over his career, he's proven that he's got the chops to handle just about anything you throw at him. But this role, where he's playing Irving Bailiff, well, it seems like a match made in heaven, truth be told. Seeing his face in the trailers was a major part of why I chose to give this show a shot, because from my own experience, Turturro doesn't take bad scripts. It's his manner of speaking that adds so much to his interviews though, and it's because he has this unique way of describing things. In these interviews, he lets us in on what it is about this character and in this show's script that drew him to the role. In an interview with IndieWire, he talks about his motivations for taking the role, and I would sum it up by saying he's deeply interested in exploring how and why people make connections even under the most difficult and unlikely circumstances. Benjamin Cardozo said something to the effect of, "The 3 great mysteries of life are birth, death, and love. If you ask me, what would you want to do for the rest of your life? And what would you want to explore? That's the thing that interests me more than anything." He also had this to say, "I liked the whole idea of the character that they had offered me, and I thought it would be interesting to see someone who's really formal and disciplined and rigid. Then, all of a sudden, he gets rocked and this wave of emotion comes in." This is no doubt in reference to the budding romance that develops between himself and Burt Goodman, played by Christopher Walken. This event is a key aspect of his story arc, and it's the biggest reason for Irving's turn from the mild-mannered rule follower to the brazen rebel on the severed floor. It's Irving's reaction to the situation that made us cheer for him in the first place, and it's the moment in the story that he finds his true conflict, his main reason for being here. Suddenly, there's a legit reason for us to care about this character and how things go for him. As far as the romance between these 2 characters, this part had to be done right, and to be honest, they nailed it. Now, I touched on this topic a bit in the first behind-the-scenes video, but when John Turturro was approached for the role by Stiller and Erickson, he made it very clear that he was down to do the romance angle, but it had to be done with the right person. And apparently, he had a short list in mind, but it sounds like the first choice was Christopher Walken. When you know each other a little bit, you know how each other works and how we bounce off of each other. You don't have to act as much, he says. And look at this guy. This is pro actor talk. Walken and Turturro have a long history and a few projects together, and it's this familiarity that they have and its ease, coupled with carefully precise direction, that makes these scenes just work. That stuff you bring with you from all the years you've known each other matters, Walken said. Having socialized together, I know his family, and we talked about food. And we talk about food a lot, John and I. We don't talk too much about the show. The scenes between these two characters are handled with nuance and subtlety that suits the circumstance, and all the feels are there despite constraints of the constructed world that they exist in. Lumen doesn't allow for fraternizing between innies, which is corporal speak for keep it business, which makes sense, and it is kind of funny when you think about it. I mean, imagine if your innie was in a relationship that you knew nothing about at work, or worse, they hooked up with someone you absolutely despise. But yeah, I couldn't help but think about the theory that Irving had his memory wiped before he ended up in MDR while reading about this. It made me think of the many small moments that hint to a hidden history for this character. You get the sense that Cobell and Milchek know his past dealings at Lumen and are wary about letting him off the leash. The theory that Irving was once in a position similar to Milchek's is certainly plausible. I mean, it does explain his rote knowledge of all things Lumen, including the writing of these thickly bound green books. He's got the perfect personality for a Lumen middle manager when you think about it. He gets bent out of shape at the mere suggestion of breaking the rules. But we should also consider the idea that in the past, he might have already had an office fling with Burt. Yep. This might not be the first time Irving was completely transformed after making a human connection on the severed floor. This is one of those theories that I'm hoping is true because I think it fits well with the overall messaging of the show. Now, another thing Turturro talks about is how he took his role without knowing the full story, which according to him is highly irregular. That's not a quote, that's just how I imagine Irving would say it. Severance fan fiction coming soon. Turturro explains that he usually knows the entire story and has a full understanding of the character he's playing before any actual acting takes place. In the case of the Severance script, only some of the season was written at the time he was approached for the role. Suffice it to say, that must have been one spicy script if it was enough to sell him on it early. Whenever I've done a job before, I usually read the whole thing, Turturro said. This wasn't completed. They had a few episodes and I went out to dinner with producers Ben Stiller and Dan Erickson, and Dan had a whole backstory for the character that I found fascinating and potential reasons why Irving might have decided to undergo the procedure. Another fun fact I uncovered was that Turturro and Zach Cherry, who plays Dylan, had opposite approaches when it came to their roles. In an interview with Looper, Zachary says that he didn't want to know anything about his character beyond the minimum needed to play him, and he actively chose to remain ignorant to the backstory because he felt it would make the acting more authentic. We know Dylan doesn't know anything about his other half and has the wildest ideas about what his life is like on the outside. Early on, Dan Erickson and Ben Stiller asked how much backstory I wanted to know, and I said, not a ton. He doesn't know who he is. So I was like, well, I don't really need to know until that becomes relevant. Now, I don't know about you, but I know my brain, and I know that I would have to know everything. So props to Zach for having the mental fortitude to remain ignorant in the name of authenticity. Now let's move on to Christopher Walken for a bit. Now, he did an interview with the New York Times, and in it he talks about his experience getting into the show. He starts off with a funny quote where he basically says he doesn't usually get to be the guy that gets the girl, or in this case, the guy, because he's usually the character that chops people up. That does make it hard to root for a guy. He's kind of made a name for himself as a dude that plays psychos, but pigeonholes be damned. In show business, very often your career has to do with playing a certain type of part. Severance was something different, and that was appealing, to do something people don't usually ask you to do. Severance sounds like it was a nice change of pace and maybe even a new challenge for this Hollywood vet, but it also came with the benefit of working with a friend. These two go so far back that they can't even remember exactly how they met, but according to Walken, it was sometime in the late 1960s. Oh, and before I forget, here's my recommendations for Walken films that you should definitely check out. Deer Hunter, The Dead Zone, King of New York, and A Late Quartet. Like John, Chris has been around the block a few times, and he's also a celebrated actor with a standout career spanning decades. So it's no surprise that these two professionals, with that natural inclination towards each other, make magic on celluloid. I want to mention one last thing in this video, and it's a quote by John Turturro that I love. It's the best explanation I've heard so far of what it's like to be severed. This is in response to him being asked about his thoughts on the character in an interview over at Screen Rant. They're all kind of reduced to this child state, kindergarten state at moments. You're always looking for worlds maybe you haven't fully investigated or whatever. Then obviously it depends upon your interplay with your partners. They really help you form your character. You could think all of these things, but if Britt brings something or Zach does something to me, then I have to respond to that within that world. That's what makes it interesting. It's also about what happens between the people too. Personally, I keyed into the line about exploring new worlds because it's a perfect way to describe it. Everything is new and full of mystery to an innie trapped on the severed floor. They're about as perfect a blank slate as you could expect from a full-grown adult. Most of the things we know and take for granted are forbidden knowledge to an innie, and their understanding is severely limited by their lack of life experiences. They don't have context. This makes the idea of being reduced to a childlike state a perfect description. When you think back to the many times we watch innies trying to grasp at tiny hints of the outside world in quiet desperation, or even tinier inner worlds they've been unaware of until now, it really brings home the idea, doesn't it? That's how I see what happens to Irving and the rest of MDR. Well, Irving stepped in it, but it opened his eyes to an entirely new space, a frontier unknown to him, something probably never considered. There is a recognizable, constant thread that runs through every innie character's personal arc, and it's the real human connections that they make that's the catalyst for their transformations into the heroes we've come to admire. And you know what? I think we're gonna see more of this theme in the coming seasons. So that's a wrap on this video. More like it on the way, so keep them peeled if that's something you're interested in. Let's hope we get some news on season 2 very soon. Once we do, I will definitely be out here to broadcast it to you guys. If you enjoyed this video, you already know what to do. Let me know what's on your mind in the comments, and until we meet again, be safe out there, tinfoilers, and off you go.